It's that time again, and this time I'm talking about a UFC pay-per-view, which usually means the episode's going to be a little bit longer and a little bit more interesting. But we'll see. This is a strange pay-per-view card, and I've used that line a lot, and probably a lot more, and I really need to use it less. But it's an interesting card in the sense that the top of it is very, very good. We got two title fights in the main event and the co-main event. That's always fun, and they're both very, very good title fights that I have legitimate questions as to whether the champion is going to retain, which is the best kind of title fights because it keeps my brain going. I do think that the fight between Gaethje and Olivera is going to be very, very good, regardless of who wins, regardless of what particular route the fight follows. I'm less certain about Carlos Barza versus Rose Namajunas. I can see some avenues where that fight is kind of anticlimactic, but it's still interesting in the sense that Carla has beaten Rose before. This is a rematch, and obviously that leaves a lot of questions. Like, Rose is definitively a better fighter than the Rose that lost to Carlos Barza. But Carla is also a better fighter, and I'm not sure that Rose's improvements are actually in the correct locations, ironically. But we'll talk more about that fight when I get to it. But the rest of the main card is... I don't know if depressing is really the right word, but you have Michael Chandler versus Tony Ferguson, which is two fighters who... Ferguson is done. Chandler might be done. Like, there's always been a thought in my head that Michael Chandler's decline is not going to be slow and graceful. It's going to be rapid. He's going to go from the top of the pile, or near the top of the pile, to very, very far down the pile. And we're kind of seeing that a little bit. Like, sure, yes, losing to Justin Gaethje and losing to Charles Oliveira, who are now fighting for a title, is not actually a problem. It's not the results. It's just the way he's fighting inherently seems like a man who is less equipped to answer questions over the course of a fight and physically might be on the decline. Although he's been showing some pictures himself, and he does look great. But then you have Ovince St. Preux and Maurice and Shogun. That's a depressing fight, like, at any time you would make it, really? And then you have Donald Cerrone and Joe Lozon, which is a super fun fight, historically speaking, but is at a point in the career where both guys are talking about retirement and probably should be retired. So you have a lot of these fights that, like, on first glance, is like, oh, Ferguson versus Chandler, that's a great fight. Lozon versus Cerrone, that's a great fight. OSP versus Shogun, it's not a great fight, but, like, you know, it's a fight of reasonable repertoire. But at the point in the career for five of the men for sure, and possibly all six, it's kind of just a downslope. And I think any one of those individual fights I'd be actually pretty excited for. It's just that you put all three of them on the same card and in a row, and I'm a bit of a buzzkill on it, I guess. It's the same kind of dynamic repeating itself. And a good MMA card, in my opinion, is one that gives you a little bit of everything. Great action fights, big knockouts, big submissions, classic decisions. You know, a good mix of it. It's kind of like my constant defense of decision fights. Decision fights are some of the best fights you're ever going to see. That being said, I don't want a card of entirely decisions. And that's kind of what we have here with three fights that have kind of a same overarching motif. And that's why I'm a little bit sour on them. But then you got Randy Brown and Chaos Williams. That's going to be good. And then you have some super, super interesting fights. And in fact, a fight that I've gained a lot of excitement for in Tracy Cortez versus Melissa Gatto. Like, really? And also Lupita Godinez versus Ariane Carnelossi. Both of those fights have me very, very intrigued. Although I can't help but think that, like, so recently, after Ariane Carnelossi made her UFC debut, I actually met a sim racer and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner out of Quebec named Alan Halsau Carnelossi. So that's always been an interesting, like, little side note deal. Me and him have an agreement that if we're ever in the same town. We're going to meet up. We're going to have a grappling match. Maybe we're going to record it. He'll probably win. He's, to my knowledge, actually active on the competitive circuit. And despite being way smaller than me, like the size of a flyweight, he'll probably out-scramble me and make me look bad. But hey, that hasn't stopped me before. Let's talk about some quick news keeping, though. Just in the world of MMA, we had the Ryan Clark Dana White interview, which a lot of people are talking about, where Dana White said boxers are overpaid. I don't really see why anything about that interview is actually discussion worthy. Like, everything Dana White said is exactly what you'd expect him to say. And like, people are like, I'm disappointed that Ryan Clark didn't do, I'm in a nutshell, a better job. And it's like, did anyone really think, number one, that Dana White's ever going to sit down with anyone who's going to put his heels to the fire in terms of like making things happen? Because there's no one with that large enough of a, like, there's no major MMA reporter who would. Like, when you look at it, like the big names are like Helwani, and then like various UFC and ESPN created people that are not really going to question anything about it. Like, sure, if he sat down with Luke Thomas or John Nash or Mike Russell or Kareem, we might have an interesting thing, actually. But he's not going to sit down with any of the people I just listed there. Like, they may get to asking me a question at a press conference, but there's going to be no long-form interview with any of those people because there's no advantage business-wise to Dana doing that. So he goes on with Ryan Clark. He's not going to get his heels put to the fire, and that's not Ryan Clark's gimmick. I mean, I understand people are like, well, he's a former professional athlete. He should instantly side with fighters and instantly side with the athletes. It's not really been his repertoire throughout the whole thing. He's been kind of a establishment media figure, really, regardless of what he does. And that's how he got the deal to do the show with Daniel Cormier. You're not gonna see him do anything. So I mean, it was incredibly predictable, and I guess I have nothing further to say on the matter. You can agree that MMA fight or boxers are overpaid or whatever, but then I think you have to also agree that like Dana White is overpaid, because like the big problem people tend to have with athletes making a lot of money is they don't make the world better through their job. I mean, some of them do get involved a great deal with charity and helping things. Charles Oliveira, for example, really does. Dustin Poirier, another example in MMA. And there are other ones in larger sports that pay more. But by that same token, the people who put on the fight shouldn't be billionaires then. So, I mean, that same logic applies either way. If you believe UFC fighters don't deserve more, then you probably should believe Dana White doesn't deserve what he makes. And if you believe boxers are overpaid, then you probably also shouldn't believe that boxing promoters make the amount of money that they do. So there you go. That's my take on that whole thing. I don't think there's anything else really going on in the MMA media sphere. Really, I'm just like, kind of thinking here, and it's not really anything particular going on that's super interesting. Bunch cuts happened in the UFC. I guess the only interesting thing there, like, there was no one that got cut that was intriguing, with perhaps the exception of Dean Barry. And the reason I say that is because I never understood why Dean Barry was on contract. Like, I didn't understand the logic. There wasn't really... I said this before his fight with Mike Jackson and then after his fight with Mike Jackson. I didn't get it. There was no inherent thing in the cage that he brought to the table that actually made a lot of sense. Like, to be in the UFC. He didn't have the resume. He didn't have the fight record. He didn't have the cult following. Although, I may have been wrong on that, because there are some people that are still very big fans of him and trashing Mike Jackson for refusing to fight a guy who kicked him in the balls twice, poked him in the eye once, understandably, and then fish hooked him in the eye. I wouldn't have wanted to continue that fight either. But, so that was a bit weird. Like, it's weird, like, what changed? Because it's not like Dana White has exactly, like, been terribly condemning of his, like, behavior in the cage. So that was moderately surprising. And I guess the other thing was that they made Paddy Pimblett into the new Greg Hardy by cutting the people that he had beat. Because if you remember, like, the big deal with Greg Hardy was like everyone he's beaten has actually been cut from the UFC. Like, is he UFC level? And people be like, oh, he's won fights. To guys who then got cut. It's kind of the same thing because Luigi Vendramini and Kazulo Vargas both got cut. So interesting, like, Paddy Pimblett development, I guess. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying Paddy Pimblett is Greg Hardy. Number one, there isn't nearly the amount of legal and moral baggage between the two. And number two, I think Paddy Pimblett is actually good at things in the cage. I didn't think Greg Hardy ever was. Greg Hardy was like this pseudo like idea of like, okay, he's an NFL level athlete. Can he become a good heavyweight? And obviously there is something to be said for like the football crossovers, Matt Mitrione and Brendan Schaub being like kind of the high watermark of guys who did come to the UFC with that as the primary reason and did reasonably well. But in the case of Greg Hardy, it became very clear early on that he wasn't very good. and that was kind of about it. Pimblett is a very optimistic, very venomous grappler, very tough, has a pretty good cardio, gas tank. His stand-up is atrocious, I will say that. And he's not a particularly great wrestler, but he has won 2 fights. There are other people he'll probably win against, and I think they're talking about matching him up with Otman Azaitar, which is a winnable fight for both men. So I guess win-win. Depends on what happens. If it's a grappling fight, Pimblett's going to win. If it's a striking match, I tend to take Azaitar. But we'll break that fight down in more detail when it's actually upon us. Let's talk really quick about Bellator and PFL because I don't have much to say. And it's not because it's Bellator and PFL. It's just that both Bellator and PFL have a very similar problem. They, compared to the UFC, cannot put on a compelling card, like top to bottom. They tend to have a lot of filler on there. They tend to have a lot of fights. And in PFL's case, it's the sort of season idea where the matchmaking is not based on like what's going to give an exciting fight that leads to like, hey, fighter A is really interesting, but fighter B isn't. So we'll quickly talk about Bellator 280. There are some good names on this card, like Mike Shipman and Lorenz Larkin are both fighting, but they're both fighting, and Soren Back. But in the case of Back and Larkin, they're fighting fights that they should easily win, and there's not really much else to say about it. And in the case of Shipman, I'm not confident enough on Mike Shipman to say that he'll ever easily win a fight, but he should beat Gregory. I'm not sure how to say this guy's name, and I've seen it pronounced a couple different ways, so I'm going to go with Babine. We'll go with that. That could be a fun fight because like Mike Shipman's always fun, and Babine's a reasonably interesting fighter to watch, but like there's no major stakes to that. Like if Shipman loses to Babine, it just means Shipman fucked up, and if Shipman beats Babine, it also doesn't mean anything because it's a fight that he set up to basically win. And then, like I said, Larkin, I for one, I don't really know why Kyle Stewart keeps fighting at 185. Like he's 6 feet tall and like a scarecrow. Like he looks like a welterweight. Larkin's just way better. Like he's a better striker. He's not necessarily a better wrestler because Larkin's not like a particularly technical wrestler or anything, but he's a very physical wrestler, very physical in the clinch. So I don't really see where Stewart's supposed to have an advantage over him. I think Larkin will either win a kind of ugly decision or he'll finish him. And then, like I said, yeah, you've got Soren Back versus Charlie Leary, but Charlie Leary is just not very good, and Soren Back will probably knock him out. Is this Soren Back? Soren Back has fought in Bellator before, twice. Okay, Bobby Lee and Terry Brazier. Yeah, another guy who has actually beaten Paddy Pimblett, for example, going back to the whole, bring it all together. The rest of the undercard is a bunch of people that don't particularly matter. I mean, there are unproven, interesting prospects. Like there's a couple of undefeated fighters, most notably Fabakary Diatta, who's 8-0, but hasn't really beaten anybody. So, and he's not really fighting anybody. He's fighting Jordan Barton, who's 6-2-1. With an unimpressive resume, so it's kind of like, sure, maybe we'll look back on this and this will be a bigger deal, but it's not a big deal right now, so there's not really much to talk about there. And then you have the two main fights: Yoel Romero and Alex Polizzi in the co-main, and then Ryan Bader and Chuck Congo in the main event. Bader versus Congo is, I think, a fairly easy fight to talk about. Their first fight ended up in a no contest due to a poke to the eye. Chuck Congo is most famous for being a dominant clinch guy who knees people in the balls and also eye pokes a little bit, like, kind of a dirty fighter, frankly, who made a living in the UFC and now in Bellator off of just raw physicality, and that probably won't be enough to deal with Bader. Bader's a better wrestler. Bader's on par physically. I mean, granted, 205er versus a heavyweight, but Chuck Congo's not even that massive of a heavyweight. There was at one point Congo talking about going down to 205, so I mean, there you go. Bader's in decline at this point just because of age. I think he's actually technically probably the best version of Ryan Bader that we've ever seen. But he is 38 years old. He's been talking a lot about the rejuvenation from some products that he's got sponsorships with, and I have no doubt that they probably work. I mean, Ryan Bader still looks like ridiculous. So if Ryan Bader endorses a supplement, it might be worth looking at. But I think it's probably a little bit insane to think that like 38-year-old Ryan Bader is like on the upswing of his career, like unless he's Randy Couture basically, or like Dan Henderson. But yeah, he'll probably be able to out wrestle Congo, outstrike him, probably submit him at some point because Congo will give up his neck when he's in trouble, and Bader should probably put him there. So yeah, Bader will probably win, and then Yoel Romero versus Alex Polizzi. I'm not really sure where Romero is right now. Like Romero's in that same boat. Like he's in his 40s, yet still somehow freakishly athletic. Like Romero in his prime, or even close to his prime, decimates Polizzi. Polizzi's just fine. Like he's an interesting enough fighter, reasonably well rounded, has some good performances, but like his high water mark has kind of already been established as like Julian Iglesias, which is not very high. So yeah, he'll also probably lose. So I mean, they're not supremely interesting fights. Even by Bellator standards, it's not a great card. And then in PFL, you've got a lot of interesting people. Kayla Harrison's on the card. Ray Cooper III's on the card. Anthony Pettis is on the card. Rory McDonald, although very faded Rory McDonald, is on the card. Julia Budd's on the card. Vanessa Mello, a UFC reject. Not reject, but like, someone who's faded out on the card. Larissa Pachenko. Like, there's a lot of people on the card, but like their matchups aren't very easy. Like, Kayla Harrison's gonna stomp. Ray Cooper III probably should stomp. Anthony Pettis is definitely gonna stomp because Miles Price is not good. Rory McDonald should beat Brett Cooper. Like, that should still be like a level of competition that Rory McDonald can beat, but Rory is really, really not looking great lately. The fight that actually does have me really interested is Magomed Kiramov versus Zal Zeferino, because like those are two very similar, like kind of grapple heavy guys who are pretty good. I'm actually looking forward to that one. That could be interesting. I'm picking Zeferino. I think he's just like that slightly better grappler, and I think he also has a better stand-up game. But and honestly, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the recent fight that we had in the UFC. I'm trying to remember the guy's name, but it was Kyle Boheo and Gadzi Omar Gadziev. I want to say is his name. Kind of a similar fight to that, actually. And that was pretty fun. This, I think, will be pretty fun. And yeah, like that's an interesting fight. But then you have Julia Budd fighting Ganon Fabian. She should win that fight. You've got Larissa Pachenko versus Famazgul Faisal Lanova. That is a mouthful. And Pacheco will probably win that fight. And then Gleason Tebow is probably going to win his fight. And then Abby Montez is on the card. Okay, that's interesting. It's Olena Kolsinik, but like Kolsinik's not very good. And then Vanessa Mello versus Martina Jindarova, which again she'll probably win because that's how that'll probably go. So like there you go. Like there's nothing super intriguing on the matter, and that's kind of why I'm low key on it. Not super intriguing Not super interested. Those fights are tomorrow, though. I do encourage people to check it out because, I mean, watching Bellator and PFL is, I think, the best way you can help MMA fighters because for all the flaws in Bellator and PFL, and there are a lot of them, until there is a proof that there is, dare I say it, a way to create an MMA promotion in America that is not the UFC, there is no leverage for fighters. There has to be a number two. There has to be a market for fighters. Otherwise, the pay is not going to go up. And this potentially will lead to more, potentially it'll lead to better fights if these promotions can actually be profitable and attract a viewer base. So, like, while I just talked bad about these cards, these are the best promotions we have in the States to try to rival the UFC. These are the best way to create a market. So check it out. Even if they're not like super exciting on paper fights, they could be particularly good. So let's move on to UFC 270. Is it 270? 274. Right. So yeah, starting at the top, we got Charles Oliveira, Justin Gaethje. All right. This is a super interesting fight. And excuse the scratching noise. I have no idea what is going upstairs. But something is going on upstairs. I don't know what it is. Obviously, with Chucky Olives, you have the interesting area of being a UFC fighter that we've seen lose a fair number of times, yet be UFC champion. And this comes up every time someone's talking about who is the most beatable UFC champion around. It almost always has Chucky Olives, and the Chucky Olives fans get angry about it. But you have to see why it is. I mean, this is a guy that we have seen lose. Whereas if you look at, for example, Francis Ngannou, sure, we've seen him lose once, but it was to a very specific skill set that isn't necessarily available, and it's a loss he's avenged. Similarly, yes, Kamaru Usman is lost, and Izzy Adesanya is lost, but Adesanya lost at a weight class above. Usman is pretty unstoppable, pretty dominant. And then you have the likes of Alex Volkanovski, who we really haven't seen lose. And then we had Peter Yan, now we have Aljamain Sterling. But like even Aljo ranks pretty high on the list. And then like Moreno and Figueiredo, who are basically trading that the flyweight belt. It's like, okay, like both of them can possibly lose to some people, but like it's a pretty short list. Whereas with like Oliveira, we've seen him lose to a very skill sets and physicality levels. And it's also lightweight, which is the deepest division, in my opinion, in all of MMA. Because here's the thing. When you watch a lightweight fight in the UFC or elsewhere, and then after the fight, you're trying to think of think of someone to fight. And you're like, oh, it's time to fight like a ranked fighter for this person. And then you look at the rankings and realize, no, he really can't beat the ranked fighters because that's how deep the division is. Like in any other weight class, it's like, all right, you're ready for like a top 15 fight. And then at lightweight, it's like, maybe not. Like slow your roll a little bit. Like that's the depth of the division, and that plays a role as well. And it also probably has to do with the fact that if you look at Chucky Olives fights with Michael Chandler and with Dustin Poirier, there were significant parts of the fight that he was losing. And those are parts of the fight that I think Gaethje can do a lot of capitalizing on. Oliveira, while his stand-up has gotten better and better and better and better and better over his UFC career, and I expect to see more iterations and more improvements because every time out we get them, he still is hurtable and hittable on the feet. He's not the most durable guy, but he has fixed like his tendency to fade out of fights. Like he's got heart now. I think he always had heart, but I think that like he's now partnered the heart with like a confidence that this is not over, that he can come back from this. And that makes him that much more dangerous because he can come back. He doesn't have to dominate. And then with Gaethje, we have seen him lose. And we have seen him lose to Khabib Nurmagomedov. And in a way that you would think Oliveira is going to try to replicate, which is pressure, takedowns, superior grappling. Oliveira definitely has the last part of that. And he does have pretty good pressure footwork. But he also gets hurt, and he doesn't have Khabib's inhuman physicality. And he does have good wrestling, but again, he doesn't have Khabib level wrestling, and he doesn't have Khabib's inherent level of insane physicality. So the question is can he do that? Like, the pathway is written for him. Can he follow it? Does he have the physical, specifically the physical skills? Because I think the technical skills are not really in question. And then, obviously, has Gaethje learned from that as well? Because we haven't seen Gaethje face that same kind of thing. Like, obviously, Michael Chandler is like, big wrestler and should, but Chandler largely did not approach the fight the same way that Khabib did. Like, there is, despite the fact that Chandler, in theory, has that same wrestler and insane physicality style that Khabib does, he just does not fight that way. He fights more aggressively open, I guess is the way to put it. Less defensively responsible. And it means you can hit him up. And also, Chandler, at this point, is a bit of a fading artist. And that's a bit of a problem. Now, that led to an amazing fight. But still, I'm picking Chucky Olives here. And I may change my fight time, to be honest. And this may even be like a weigh-in pick type deal. Although I expect both men to look perfectly fine on the scales. My brain is still doing somersaults over this. Like, does Gaethje's low kick game, insane violence of stand-up, power, durability, complete unwillingness to accept the back foot mean that he's going to beat Chucky Olives, that he's going to hurt Chucky Olives enough to make Chucky Olives question himself and fall back? Or does that insane level of aggression just really play into Chucky Olives' own pressure? Because against Khabib, that kind of was the case. And again, it's not that Olivera is Khabib. It's just that Khabib did it so easily. So the question is, how much below Khabib do you have to be to do that if you take that strategy? And where does Chucky Olives fit on that idea? Gaethje is very confident. He thinks he's going to basically make Charles Oliveira quit, and that's definitely possible. But Oliveira has become like kind of a different beast, and the old thoughts of him being fragile mentally I don't seem to really be there. So that's my hope. That's my hope. Sorry, bit of a stuffy nose moment. Okay. Yeah, so I've got Oliveira, but I mean, if you're picking Gaethje, I have no problem with that idea because I this fight is a minus 165 Oliveira to plus 140 Gaethje fight, and I think it should be closer than that. Like, I think this is an even money fight. Like, either option could absolutely happen. But what I'm hoping for is whatever happens, it's great to watch. Rose Namajunas versus Carla Esparza. Second fight between these two. And slightly larger odds, minus 200 on Thug Rose to retain, plus 165 on Carla Esparza. I am going with Rose Namajunas. And I do feel pretty good about that. I think Rose is a wrestler and a grappler. She was a dangerous grappler when they fought the first time, but she wasn't controlled or well put together. There wasn't a lot of process to her grappling. That's changed. I think she's become way more process driven as a grappler, and I think her ability to resist pressure is much better. I think her defensive wrestling has improved. That being said, it's not really been tested that hard because she's not fought a lot of particularly good wrestlers. Because, I mean, it's not something that really is there at strawweight. It's kind of why Carla Esparza has hung around towards the top of the division for a very long time, is there's a general lack of wrestling here. Like who is the best wrestler that she has beaten? You could argue, I guess, Weili Zhang, but I think Esparza is a better technical wrestler, although less physical than her. And like Jessica Andrade, who did beat her the first time and slammed her a couple of times. So, is that like really hope driving, hope filling in that regard? I don't know. But I still think that the strawweight division requires a deeper level of striking and danger than what Carla Esparza brings. Because Esparza has gotten better as a striker. Like, her boxing is actually pretty reasonable. She's a reasonably good kickboxer. She can flummox people who have a very shallow game pretty easily on the feet, but it's not dangerous. There's no sense of impending doom that Esparza brings. Like it's just, and it's not something I don't think it's something she's failed to develop. I just think it's something that's not there. I don't think she has the right physicality for that. But she does put a pace on it. She does marry her striking with her wrestling pretty well. I fully believe that she'll put Rose in some bad spots. Like she'll get her down, she'll get some dominant positions. But I think Rose has gotten to the point where she'll survive those, she'll regroup, and she'll adjust. And I think obviously the power of having Trevor Whitman in your corner is an amazingly powerful thing. I think he is the best corner man in MMA right now. I don't know if he is the best at developing a fighter from scratch because he hasn't had, like, it's not that he hasn't had success at that, but he hasn't had tremendous success at that. Like, if you look at his best achievements, it's taking somebody who's already very much a polished prospect and kind of taking them to that level of decision making, strategy, and fight IQ and adjustment gains. And that, I think, is what it is. I think Esparza, when she is forced to be the person who's not surprising people, who's not the deeper veteran fighter, she doesn't do particularly well. And that's why I'm taking Thug Rose via decision, because I don't think she's going to finish her, although I could see it. I mean, Rose has got a good counter knockout game. She can hurt just about anyone if she finishes her with strikes, or, dare I say it, even submits her. I'm not going to be super surprised, but I think she'll win by decision. I think she'll make the correct adjustments as the fight goes on. But people have pointed out that, like, anytime she faces someone who wants to take her down, the fight is fought on very short, small margins. The record's not great, and the wins tend to be split decision in nature. Still, I think that Carla offers less of a threat than Weili Zhang did, less of a threat than Jessica Andrade did, because there's just no real danger to her, and that's going to allow Thug Rose to win. But to be honest, I would be entirely unsurprised if Carla Esparza becomes a 2-time strawweight champion in the UFC. And of course, this was a fight that was like avoided for a long time. I don't really know why. I think it's a fascinating fight, and I think it's interesting enough. And there's not really a lot of fresh blood coming through for that weight class. They're all kind of like, honestly, they're all kind of stumbling at the Esparza gate because, like, sure, it's like people are like, well, Marion Rodriguez should probably get a title shot. Yeah, but she lost to Esparza. So, like, how do you justify that as a leapfrog? Or Mackenzie Dern should get a title shot. Yeah, but she lost to Rodriguez. Like, it's a weird thing. And honestly, again, personal opinion, I put this out there. I thought Torres beat Dern, but there's that. So there's that as well. Michael Chandler's going to beat Tony Ferguson. There's not really any way around it. I'm not going to say that there's no one that Tony Ferguson can beat in the UFC, because there's probably someone, but like we got to go way down the list, I think, to find it. He's become the thing that he could never afford to be. And I think I said this back when he was rising up and we were talking about him fighting Khabib and like why I wanted to see it then, because I thought Tony Ferguson had a very small window of elite status because of the way he is. He's just insane, and he requires an insane level of physical durability that was never going to stay. And I don't think it's here anymore. I don't think he has the, not just like on durability, I don't think he has the explosiveness and the sharpness and the snappiness and the insanity that he once had. I don't think it's there anymore. And as a result, I'm pretty much going to be picking against him going forward, and I think Chandler will probably TKO him. And it's not really much about Chandler because I don't feel great about Chandler. He's kind of in a similar boat in the sense that his game was all about an insane element of physicality, a different kind of physicality, admittedly, than what Ferguson brought to the table, but it was so intrinsically based on athleticism and physicality, and I think he's falling off. I really do. Again, not that losing to Olivera and Gaethje is the end of the world. Those are, at the moment, the two best lightweights in the world, or at least two of the three best, depending on where you put Poirier. But, or I guess depending on if you think Khabib is actually going to stay retired, I suppose is the other angle. Or if you're a Conor McGregor nut. So actually, there's a lot of things. But anyways, top 5. Fine, top 5. But yeah, there is something different about him. It doesn't feel like Chandler or Bellator, and it's not simply he's fighting better competition, which he is, because I mean he's coming to the UFC. He's fought Dan Hooker, Charles Oliveira, Justin Gaethje. There's not really a three fight stretch at lightweight in the last 5 years to like a decade that is better than that. So going 1 and 2 in that is not a problem, but it's just looking at him. There's a lot of athleticism still there, but it's not on the same level. So while it's not a problem in this fight, because like I said, I think Ferguson's done. It is still troubling. OSP is going to probably knock out Shogun. Shogun is done. I'm not going to talk more about this fight because it's just going to depress me because I was a massive Shogun fan. Donald Cerrone versus Joe Lauzon. Man, it's been a long time since Donald Cerrone won a fight. He is on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 fight. Oh, pardon me. 2 of these are grappling. 6 bout. Should be a losing streak, but the no contest with Nico Price is there. But Price won that fight. Losing to Tony Ferguson, losing to Justin Gaethje, losing to Conor McGregor, losing to Anthony Pettis, Nico Price, and Alex Morono. Aside from Morono and Price, there's nothing to be ashamed of there. I mean, that's 4 of the greatest lightweights of all time. If you listen to Conor fans. Again, I guess I'll segue into this because I brought up Conor a couple of times just kind of without really meaning to it. I've always thought that if Conor McGregor focused on just fighting and doing more, his resume would hold up way better. But his resume in elite lightweight fights is pretty poor. It's 2 losses to Poirier, a loss to Khabib. That's about it. He doesn't. Okay, he beat Alvarez. Okay, and a win over Eddie Alvarez. That's not great. And then at featherweight, he's undefeated in high-level elite fights, but he really only has the Aldo and the Mendez fights. And people will be like, "Oh, he beat Dustin Poirier and Max Holloway." He beat a Dustin Poirier who was cutting down to featherweight and was inherently vulnerable, inherently chinny, and a Max Holloway who was coming off a loss to Dennis Bermudez. He was not the Max Holloway of now. It's if you look at any fighter, really any fighter, and like the exceptions would be like a John Jones or something. Hell, if you look at Conor McGregor, you will find the early loss in his career to Joe Duffy. You will find the early loss in his career to a couple other people. Let's see here. Artem Sitenikov and Joe Duffy. Okay, those are the only 2. I thought there was a third one, but there's only 2. They did not beat the final form of Conor McGregor. In that same way, Conor McGregor did not beat the final form of Dustin Poirier or Max Holloway. There you go. It's the same as when you fight someone really late in your career. Like, if Michael Chandler beats Tony Ferguson, he did not beat prime Tony Ferguson. And similarly, in this fight between Cerrone and Lauzon, whoever wins this fight will not have beaten the prime version of the other fighter. There really at no point in my career was in their careers that I would honestly pick Joe Lauzon over Cerrone. Cerrone's a much better striker. He's a competent enough grappler that I don't think Lauzon would instant sub him if it goes to the ground. I think he's probably the better wrestler. I think he's probably got the better gas tank. What the hell is going on upstairs? I have no idea. This is one of those times where, like, you kind of wish the landlords would let you know what the hell they're doing before recording a podcast. But it is what it is. I apologize. I don't even know if you can hear it, but it's loud enough on my end that I assume you can. Anyways, I still have to go with Cerrone, I still do. Like, they're both pretty equally faded, and when it comes down to it, like, Cerrone's peak was better. He's the only thing I would say that Lozon's better at is like literally just submission offense, but I don't think his submission offense is like going to instantly tap out Cerrone or really dominate him on the ground. And I think he'll have a hard time getting the fight there. So, yeah, rounding off our three kind of disappointing ones, I'm going with Cerrone. And then we've got Randy Brown versus Chaos Williams. This is really good. I'm really excited by this one. I'm going with Chaos Williams because I don't think Randy Brown responds to people who do not, I don't want to say do not respect, but are not intimidated by his physical ability, his reach, and his obviously athletic skill. Like, if you even look at his fight with Jared Gooden, as an example, Jared Gooden is not nearly as good a fighter as Chaos Ox Williams is. Williams has got a way more diverse striking game and does actually have a wrestling and grappling game to fall back on that Gooden doesn't really have. And because of that, I think that Williams is going to apply good pressure. He is going to have physical gifts similar to Randy Brown. And, well, he definitely has to negotiate around a very long reach of Brown. What is the reach difference, actually? Just out of curiosity here. It's only 1 inch. Really? 6 inches in height, but it's only 1 inch in reach. Always weirded out by the reach measurements sometimes. It really... One, it feels like that the fingertip to fingertip reach isn't really all that applicable because that's including your torso, which is not necessarily what you can put into the reach of a strike. It feels like armpit to fingertip would be more insightful and probably would tell more of the story here because I think watching this fight is going to feel like there's way more than 1 inch in reach. But I do think Williams can find his way to the inside. I do think he's a better pocket striker. I do think he's a bit more powerful. I do think he's also a bit higher paced. He fights at a very high pace. It's very, very impressive. And as a result, I'm going with Chaos Williams. Apparently, it's not a weird pick because he's a minus 135 favorite to plus 110. So it does seem like, I'm not taking I'm not taking a flyer on that, so to speak. I'm not making a hot take. It's just it's a thing. And the weird thing is, I don't think of Chaos Williams as being particularly young. And 28 is not super young in MMA terms, but he is actually the younger fighter here. Randy Brown is 31. Randy Brown is older than I thought he was. Francisco Trinaldo, Danny Roberts. A battle of a fighter who's 43 years old and definitely on the way down. And a fighter who has never really lived up to a reasonable amount of hype that he had coming in. And the problem for Danny Roberts has been that he's kind of easy to hurt. He's brittle. I think the Mike Perry fight back in the day was like the best example of this, where like Danny Roberts was clearly a better striker than Mike Perry, which is not hard to believe because Mike Perry is very much a brute force striker who is trying to force a square peg into a round hole. But he was way defter with the combinations, with the jab, with finding his range. But he lost the fight essentially because he just kept getting clocked. Like, he's got good recovery because he was hurt like 8 times by Mike Perry. And Mike Perry is super powerful, so this is not necessarily an indictment, but this has happened a couple of other times to other fighters less renowned for their punching prowess. That being said, Trinaldo is just... he's kind of at the level of I'm not going to pick him against anyone that I have at any point rated particularly highly. Because he should have lost to Jai Herbert and then finished him. He should have lost to... probably honestly should have lost to Dwight Grant. And that means that, like, we're talking about a 2020 win over John McDessie and a 2019 win over Bobby Green. And a loss to Alex Hernandez. 2019. He's fighting at an increasingly slower pace. The physicality that highlighted his game is going away. He's still very technical. He's still a good counter fighter. He's a better grappler than probably anyone really gives him credit for, generally. But Danny Roberts is the younger fighter. Trinaldo did knock out Jai Herbert, so he is not unpowerful, but he doesn't really throw the volume that I think is going to make Danny Roberts lower his guard. Well, not lower his guard, but like infiltrate his guard and catch him. It's going to be a little bit too obvious when he's loading up, and that's why I am going with Danny Roberts. But if this goes the other way, not going to be surprised. How long has it been since Danny Roberts has been in the cage? Okay, no, he fought Ramazan Aviv in 2021, although that was a notably ugly fight. But it's also a Ramazan Aviv fight, so it is going to be ugly. Macy Chiasson versus Norma Dumont. I'm taking Norma Dumont. Chiasson is a really interesting fighter because she's 5'11" and fights at bantamweight and featherweight. So, tall, rangy, reachy. What is the reach comparison here? Yeah, 5 inches of reach advantage. But she doesn't come from a combat sports background, and it kind of shows because the story with her, she basically started taking Krav Maga for self-defense in a nutshell, and that's led to MMA. So kind of like a Karolina Kowalkiewicz storyline, actually. She's not very good at using her reach. She's not very good at finding her reach. I mean, the reach is there, so like it definitely does cause issues, but like Shanna Young was able to find ways to land and kind of force Chiasson into being a wrestler and a clinch fighter. And Dumont is a way better rangefinder and range striker than what Shanna Young is. Shanna Young, to be clear, I don't think even really necessarily wants to be a range striker. She kind of wants to do everything, which is a big reason I picked her against Gina Mazzani. She proved me wrong. She did win that fight, but and Mazzani got cut. But I think Dumont knows what she wants to be. She was reasonably good at avoiding the clinch against other people. Notably, she beat Aspen Ladd recently. She had beaten Felicia Spencer prior to that. She's not bad in the clinch by any means. This would still be her best victory because while I definitely think Felicia Spencer is a more seasoned and deeper fighter, she's a not very athletic one. And while I believe Aspen Ladd is a better athletic prospect than Chiasson, she's one who seems incredibly lost and in a bad spot mentally at this point. And as a result, yeah, Chiasson would be the best win, but it's still a stylistic matchup that I think works for Dumont, as long as she doesn't find the 5 inches of reach to be a problem that she can't solve. And I'm assuming that she will. Brandon Royval versus Matt Schnell. Why is this fight not higher on the card? Brandon Royval is a flyweight contender, even if Matt Schnell really isn't at this point. I know Royval's lost 2 of his last 3 fights, so that might be part of the problem, but like one of those losses is to Moreno, and one of those losses is to Pantoja. So what's that? 2 of the top 3 fighters in the division with Davidson Figueiredo. I can't really think of this. So like, who else do you put above Royval? Like, I guess you could put Kai Kara France above him, but like he's also beaten Kai Kara France, so that would be slightly odd and slightly weird. But anyways, I'm picking Royval here. He's a minus 255 to plus 205 favorite. That's actually, I think, a little bit low. Schnell is Schnell is not good enough at forcing you to fight the fight that he wants. He has the intrinsic tendency to fight anywhere the fight goes. Like, he's got a good stand-up game, and he's got a good grappling game that if he could enforce either element, particularly in this case, the stand-up on Royval, he'd actually probably be the cleaner striker. He'd probably be the best, more technical striker. Matt Schnell is the guy that if you were to watch tape on him and you were teaching a fighter or you were becoming a fighter yourself and looking to form a striking game, you would go with Schnell's. because Brandon Royval's striking game is a mess, but it's a striking game of activity, volume, and making you panic and making you almost grapple him, because the best part of his game is probably his counter grappling. But yeah, I think I think Royval can outperform him on the feet, and if need be, he can take him down and he can out grapple him. But I am going to go with a decision, which is weird because Royval is definitely a fight finisher. Like, his style is based around finishing fights. His only decision win, I think, is actually the one he just got against Rodrigo Bonson. No, I'm wrong. He beat Charles Johnson by decision. I don't think I've ever seen that fight. So, like, a guy who has only won by decision twice, so you could definitely see this going a different way in terms of, like, getting a finish or whatever. And obviously, he also has a shoulder that pops out of its socket every once in a while, which is not good. But, yeah, I've got Brandon Royval to win this fight. I like Matt Schnell. I really do. He was the only guy from that MTV Cage show that I watched back in the day that I actually liked. Along with Tony Kelly, who's actually in the UFC as well. The other ones were just insufferable. Oh, God. But, yeah, I think I got to pick him here. Blago Ivanov to beat Marco Sergio de Lima. He's an actual heavyweight. De Lima isn't. De Lima has serious cardio issues if he can't finish you early. Ivanov is super, super tough. Ivanov is a better clinch wrestler. He's a better grappler. Yeah, he'll probably submit De Lima at some point. Or more likely, De Lima will probably just get exhausted. Andre Fiallo to beat Cameron Van Camp. Again, I don't have a ton to say about this fight. Van Camp is not very good. He's the latest entry into the "Are you really UFC" level, and my answer is kind of no. He's reasonably well rounded. He's reasonably athletic, but Fiallo is actually a pretty well schooled fighter, and this feels like a massive step down from his knockout of Miguel Baeza, and he'll probably knock out Van Camp. There you go. Like, I wish I could get deeper into that fight, but I can't. Because, like, I really would like to get deeper into Andre Fiallo. I really like Andre Fiallo. I like his pressure-based boxing style. I like really everything he's doing. The only thing I don't like is that I think he's actually a bad combination with Sanford MMA, because I think he doesn't have the inherent deep well of confidence that you essentially need to fight out of Sanford MMA, because Henry Hooft will destroy you mentally, and you have to be able to just shrug that off, and I don't think Fiallo actually can. And I think that lack of confidence sometimes shows up with hesitation in his power, in his pressure striking, but like, you put in front a less technical, less dangerous, less athletic version of Miguel Baeza. And I don't think this match makes any real sense. Is this like was this supposed to be someone else? No. Like, this was the plan the whole time. Okay. I don't know. Tracy Cortez versus Melissa Gatto. When this fight was announced, my initial thought was Cortez. I thought that she would fight at a higher pace, that her wrestling would be really solid and difference making, and that she would be able to control and kind of overwhelm Gatto. And I've changed my mind on that. I've changed that mind for two reasons. Number one, I really watched more of Melissa Gatto, and I really like what I see. Her game is actually really well put together. She's very powerful. She's very opportunistic, and she's very lethal. Like, at every moment of the fight, she is lethal, which is interesting. Now, I still do think that her lack of high-end defensive wrestling is a problem. Sarge Eubanks got her down pretty easily. And that is a big concern, because Sarge is a very powerful grappler, but she is pretty low-paced at the same time. And I haven't actually found her draws against Edna Olivera and Sydney Roca anywhere. But I have kind of a similar theory that that's kind of how it went. Like, I feel like that was kind of what happened. Maybe I'm wrong. Has anyone seen those fights that they can correct me? And the problem I see with Cortez is that at bantamweight she has great pace, but at flyweight she seems drained and she struggles to make weight. So like a big part of this is what does Cortez look at the weigh-ins? Because she could not overwhelm Justine Quiche with activity. She did win the fight, but she did not overwhelm Justine Quiche, a notably fairly low pace, fairly power reliant fighter because she's not very deep in any technical area. And it just feels like Gato, while a worse defensive wrestler than Quiche, probably, is kind of like the same test, but like a lot better. Like more physical because she's physical for a featherweight, whereas Quiche was very physical at strawweight, came up to featherweight, and the physicality hasn't quite been the same, which is fairly normal for a fighter coming up. And Gato, I think, has a way better feel for counter timing and accuracy. She's very good at finding gaps in striking. So I think at some point she will hurt Cortez and finish her. That being said, Cortez is very, very good. So if she can get the weight cut under control and Fight Ready can work its magic, is that Fight Ready gym, as much as I find Henry Cejudo cringy as all hell, is very good and is actually very much transforming fighters into better versions of what we had previously seen. So maybe that will happen here, but I can't count on that. I've counted on fighters like getting better in the past. I talked about this with the Kay Hansen thing with like, oh, she's super young. I'm like, that does not mean that she will get better. In no way. It means she has time to get better, but it does not mean that she will get better. And too often the flaws in the fighters tend to just continue to show themselves. And well, Gato, again, not flawless. I think her wrestling defense is actually quite bad. I think that will catch up to her. But if she can fix that, she's pretty young. She's 26 years old. She might be very legitimately part of the class to inherit from Valentina Shevchenko. Her and Manon Fiorot, Aaron Blanchfield. If Tracy Cortez can get her weight cut under control, Cortez, I think, is also part of that group. I think that you also will have probably Jessica Andrade, because I still think she'll end up back at flyweight at some point. And then maybe like if Macy Barber and Miranda Maverick could fix their shit. That could also be a thing. So, I mean, future of the division looks actually pretty good. It's just, right now, there's just no one interested in put up against Shevchenko. Clayton Rodriguez versus CJ Vergara. I'm taking Rodriguez. Rodriguez seems like a really well put together fighter, actually. His stand up looks very considered. He's not that easy to take down. He's got good footwork, keeps himself defensively sound, which you know I love. And Vergara just isn't really that good, I guess. Essentially, I look at this as being kind of similar to Vergara's fight with Ode Osborne in the sense that you're being presented with a guy who is a pretty decent range striker who has some theoretical flaws if you can pressure him and you can bring the fight to him. And Vergara really wasn't able to do that with Osborne. I don't think he's going to be able to do that here. But I think it'll be a good scrap. I think, it's flyweight, so it's going to be fun. Lupita Godinez versus Ariane Carnelossi. This is interesting because my first initial thought was Carnelossi. I like the more completeness of her game. I like that she's a pretty good striker, both at range and in the pocket. And Godinez is very, very sloppy on the feed. So that is still a concern. Believe me when I say that. But at the end of the day, Carnelossi wants the fight to be in the clinch. That's where she feels most comfortable. That's where she feels strongest and most powerful. Additionally, I think her last fight against Estela Nunez is one that is aging kind of poorly because Nunez has, since that fight, not been particularly great. I'm of course talking about like one fight, but it's that one fight is a loss to Sam Hughes, who I am remarkably unconfident in. So unconfident in Sam Hughes being a UFC level fighter. I am so uncomfortable with that. That when your best win is Estela Nunez, who then goes and loses to that, I really have to reappraise everything I'm thinking about the fighter. Yeah, it comes down to I think there is definitely a path to victory for Carlos, and I don't mean like even in like the puncher's chance sense of the word. I mean like there are whole aspects of this fight that she's better at. I think she's the better range striker. I think she's the better pocket striker. I think she's powerful enough that she could possibly just shrug off tie-ups with Gonines, but she wants to be in the clinch. She really wants to be in the clinch. And Godinez is part of this like recent invasion of like clinch girls. Oh, what's the other girl's name? The one who fought Ronda Marcos. Who's getting like Ronda Rousey Brazilian comparisons. Luana Pinheiro, there we go. Is another example of that where like we're getting these like really flawed fighters, but like they want to clinch. And a lot of the people that probably actually have the ability to not do that also want to clinch. And that's my problem, is that I don't see Carnelossi seeing the big red warning sign that says do not clinch with Lupita Godinez. I don't see that. And I think she's going to willingly clinch. I think she's not going to run away from the clinch. And I think Godinez is better in the clinch. And if Godinez gets her to the ground, she can control her and probably pick up a win. I do think that Carnelossi is the way better long-term prospect because I look at her and I'm like, there's a lot you can do here. Like this is actually a really physically imposing fighter with a fairly solid game actually. And whereas Godinez is like very much just kind of a clinch machine. But at the end of the day, I think that in this specific matchup, that's enough. And it looks like the odds are with me because Godinez is a minus 200 favorite. Jordy Newsom versus Fernie Garcia. I don't really know. I've watched a lot of Fernie Garcia's fights, actually. I probably is the fighter on this card that I watched the most percentage of their career, trying to come up with a theory on the matter, and I still find myself going, he's just so goddamn awkward. You look at his knockouts, and they look just awkward as all hell. You look at him defending leg kicks, and they look just awkward as all hell. But I kind of come down to the fact that I'm probably going to take him here because Newsom seems pretty chinny. And as awkward as it is, Garcia hits pretty damn hard. And that could just be enough for Newsom to lose. Because Randy Costa is an awkward as hell fighter. And he flatlined him. And Ramos hurt him a number of times as well, and he's got his own power. He did knock out Domingo Pilarte, and then tested positive for weed and got the win stripped away, which, again, I have to say this. Why are we still... Why in 2020 were people still getting stripped of wins for marijuana? I don't understand. I've really never understood why, in general, marijuana is ever really was a banned substance. Because, and people will say, ooh, it's because it was illegal. Here's the deal. Cocaine was never illegal in out-of-competition tests. It still isn't, actually. A UFC fighter can do cocaine as long as it's not, like, literally leading into the fight. And it's not a problem. So the legality of a substance is not the question. And I'll just leave that at that. But yeah, I'm picking Garcia. I have no faith in it. It's just that I've seen Newsom be chinny. I've seen Garcia have heavy hands. I've seen Garcia hit things from like awkward angles that can often amplify the power, and that's why I'm taking it. But like honestly, I like I said, I watched a lot of Fernie Garcia. I still don't have a read on this kid. I really don't. And with Journey Newsom, I really like a lot of his game, actually. It's just he's defensively irresponsible and doesn't seem to have a very good chin. So there you go. That is UFC 274. Like I said, it's a mixed bag. Like there's I really wish they keep the Chandler Ferguson fight, remove Shogun versus OSP, remove Lozon versus Cerrone, put them on other cards. Well, honestly, just don't book OSP versus Shogun, period. Actually, that would make me happy. Move Lozon and Cerrone to another card just to break up kind of that 3-pack of fights where I'm just gonna be depressed. Probably. Like I'm gonna be watching those fights and being like, man, all 6 of these fighters were way better at one point. And the fact that that's going to be like possibly 45 minutes of the card is horrifying. Well, not horrifying, but it's depressing. So there is that problem. But otherwise, it's a really good card. Interesting top 2 fights, and the undercard is pretty interesting, with the exception of Blago Ivanov versus Marcos Rogerio de Lima. That fight can burn in hell. For all I care. And Fiallo versus Van Camp is just pointless. But, I mean, it might be fun. And I'm always down to watch Andre Fiallo get another win. So there you go. And have a good day. Hope you enjoy the fights. Check out Bellator. Check out PFL. There might be some cool stuff there. And stay sane. Because the MMA world is maybe the weirdest hodgepodge of how we think about things. Like things are just insane at times. Watching MMA Twitter and social media and stuff.